All right, well, we've talked a lot about peace, peace deals, negotiations. Jeremiah, you have a story today that I think drives home the stakes of, well, what really is at stake when we're talking about bringing about peace in this day and age.
Yes, that's right. And the story is that Russia and China are pushing the world back into the fallout zone, into a new era when the prospect of nuclear war is looming large once again. Now, the world has, of course, never really left the nuclear era ever since these unfathomably destructive weapons were first designed and mass produced last century. But there was a time a few decades back when the leaders of Russia and America and other nations started to recognize that the threat was just too grave, the stakes were just too high, and that these doomsday devices were far too destructive to keep on building more and more of them. So back at that time, the Russians and Americans began paring down their arsenals, and some landmark treaties were enacted to limit the construction and the use of these weapons. In the 1990s, Russia even began dismantling a lot of its nuclear warheads, and it would actually downblend that highly enriched uranium and then sell it to the United States for use in American nuclear power plants. So it was a program called Megatons to Megawatts, turning weapons of annihilation into fuel to power life. So all of this made it seem for years like we were stepping back from the brink. But that time is now over. On Monday, the Wall Street Journal published a powerful piece called "The Bomb is Back as the Risk of Nuclear War Enters a New Age." And that might sound a little bit hyperbolic, but really evidence of this new nuclear era is everywhere. You've got Russia talking about and considering more and more the use of tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, just to give it a battlefield advantage. We've also had Russia recently deploy nuclear weapons to Belarus. And Russia has been openly violating the INF Treaty. That's the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. They were violating that for some time, which finally led to the treaty's collapse a couple of years back. And now Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced that he's pulling out of the New START Treaty as well. So that one will be toast in about a year. And those two treaties, the INF and the New START, they were the main pillars of the efforts to reduce the nuclear threat. They put all kinds of limitations on the deployment and use of these weapons, but now they're gone. And that revives the potential of a new nuclear arms race between Russia and the United States. And then the Chinese, meanwhile, are not waiting for a starting gun. Since 2015, China has doubled its arsenal of nuclear-tipped ICBMs. That brings the current count to about 600. And every one of these can strike the United States mainland, according to the Pentagon's latest assessment of Chinese military power. Chinese leaders also consistently reject proposals to meet with American authorities, just about discussing placing formal limits on nuclear weapons. And China's pace of building new ones just keeps on increasing. We expect them to hit 1,000 very soon. And then China also recently became the world's third nation after the US and Russia to achieve a nuclear triad, which means the capability to deliver nuclear weapons by land, sea, and air. And of course, it's not just Russia and China. In recent months, Iran has also kept pushing its nuclear development ahead. This utterly fanatical regime could be mere months away from having a nuclear bomb. There's also North Korea, another fanatical regime which is expanding its nuclear arsenal and making some big strides in improving its delivery systems for nuclear weapons. You've also got Germany, where military personnel have been receiving more and more training about how to drop the nuclear bombs that America has stocked in Germany. And then there's Pakistan, where more concerns are coming up about how vulnerable its nuclear weapons are to terrorist hijacking, especially since the United States has now pulled out of neighboring Afghanistan. And then on top of all that, you've got discussions underway in a lot of countries about obtaining nuclear arsenals of their own for the first time. We see that happening in Japan, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Taiwan, Turkey. and Ukraine as well. So it's plain to see that the bomb is back. It's thanks mostly to Russia and China, but also due to developments in several other nations. And this means the shadow of the mushroom cloud looms large once again.
And this is something, I was going to go and look for something from the Key of David on this show because I was like, oh, I know Mr. Flurry has talked about this quite a lot, and I didn't even have to look because I was looking through his show on Cuba, and well, this is what he had to say on this exact subject in that Cuba show.
Sometimes we act like there's no danger of nuclear warfare, and I think we're in many ways afraid to even discuss it when these bombs are just being proliferating all over the world, and the terrorists are certain to get control of them. And terror-sponsoring nations are going to get control of them, just like Iran is about to.
I mean, this is a very real problem that because it's so big, and I think it's so big and scary we don't want to think about. I think there's also a complacency in that people look at this and say, we've had bombs for 80 years. If we were going to blow ourselves up, we'd have done it by now. That there's kind of like we just have gotten used to these nuclear weapons. But a big reason to really stay alert still about these nuclear weapons and what's going on here is, well, the Bible and even Jesus Christ himself talked about nuclear weapons. They talked about weapons that mankind would have that would give mankind the ability to destroy the planet, to destroy himself, which is an incredible prophecy because there is no way a human mind living 2,000 years ago in a world where the most destructive weapon would be like an onager, like a type of catapult or something, like that, to be able to foresee that future. So the Bible is a powerful reason as well to take these weapons seriously.
That's a very good point. Yes, if you look at Bible prophecy, there are passages that talk about a war that will soon break out. And Matthew 24 says that it'll be so destructive that it will have the potential to erase all human life from the planet. So from that detail, we can be sure that this is talking about nuclear war with so many nuclear weapons detonated that it triggers a nuclear winter. So when we see Russia right now violating treaties and putting nuclear weapons in Belarus and talking about using tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and when we see China in overdrive to expand its nuclear arsenal and refusing to sign any kind of treaties about that, and when we see all these other developments that we've mentioned in other nations, all of that shows us that this war is approaching. And that is as alarming a reality as anything we could imagine. But those same prophecies tell us that this nuclear war will not wipe out mankind. You know, they tell us that the war will actually be interrupted by the most momentous event that the world has ever experienced. And Mr. Fleury has written an entire booklet about this subject. It's called Nuclear Armageddon is at the Door. And he goes through the prophecies about the very devastating war, of course, in that booklet. But he also devotes a lot of space to the good news, you know, to that interruption and what comes after it. So I hope that listeners will visit thetrumpet.com and order their free copy of Nuclear Armageddon is at the Door.
Well, thank you very much for that, Jeremiah. Did you have any other Asia stories you wanted to give us before we wrap up?
A couple of quick ones. Yes, first up, a story with some sobering implications for Taiwan, and that is that China is now building a fleet of special D-Day style barges that look to be designed specifically for an amphibious attack. This was reported by Naval News a couple of days ago, and it's based on satellite imagery of China's shipyard in Guangzhou. And China might be making as many as 6 of these massive barges, and they would be perfect for an invasion of Taiwan. They have bridges almost 400 feet long, which would let troops kind of bypass beaches that might be mined or otherwise difficult to land on. The barges also have massive pillars that stabilize them on the seafloor, even in very bad weather. So these could move great numbers of soldiers and trucks and tanks and weapons onto Taiwan. And the fact that China is suddenly focusing on the construction of these barges so much could mean that the invasion of Taiwan might be nearer than most of us would like to think. And then another quick China story here about their economy. The Chinese economy is suffering through some tough times right now, but despite that, Or actually, according to some economists, because of that, China has just posted a trade surplus with the rest of the world of almost $1 trillion. So that is just a remarkable gap between Chinese imports and exports. And the Wall Street Journal wrote about this, saying, for Washington and its allies, this ascendancy shows that efforts to reduce their dependence on China are coming up short. That suggests it'll remain hard for Trump to rebalance US-China trade relations, even if he pushes tariffs higher. End quote. And President Trump, of course, has threatened to impose more serious tariffs on Chinese goods sold in the US. He's talked about 60% on those tariffs. But this Wall Street Journal article says that this massive surplus in China means that the Chinese have $1 trillion head start in any kind of tariff fight. So this shows that it won't be easy for the US to press China to rebalance its trade. And it shows that China is coming into Trump's second term with some real economic leverage on the table.